All right, here we are. Kinesiology 230, Chapter 16, presentation number 4. Still talking about components of aerobic endurance training. We have one more presentation to go after this one, but we're here, components. We started on page 426. We've worked ourselves through this far, and we're going into training frequency, duration, progression, warm-up, and cool-down next. There we go. All right, so training frequency refers to how often workouts are performed. And we talked about this in our strength training component, resistance training. This kind of depends upon, move myself over here, goals, fitness level, duration, intensity, recovery time available. And they reflect back on the accumulated number of minutes per week, 150 to 300 or 75 to 150. It depends if it's moderate intensity or vigorous intensity. And you'll often find that people have kind of a blended number here. It's not going to be straight 150 to 300 of moderate. Some people are 150 to 300 of vigorous. But when you look at it, the committee stated here that the exercise bouts of any length contribute to the health benefits associated with the accumulated volume of physical activity. So what they're saying is, as long as you do a little something each day, it'll accumulate over time and add to the 150 or 300 or the 75 to 150. It just depends what bucket it goes into. That's the thing. Now the ACSM advises that most adults engage in moderate intensity cardiovascular activity training for at least 30 minutes or more per day and 5 days of the week for a total of 150 minutes per week, which is in line with up here. And they're talking about moderate intensity physical activity. So that hits kind of the bare minimum that's offered through his 2018 physical activity guidelines. And I'm on board with this. I think when you look at it in terms of working out and what people do, you'll have individuals where they can only do so much, right? And with individuals, when they're working out, you have to be able to calculate in, okay, how much time do they have to recover? How much time do they have to work out? How much time do they actually have? Will they get their 150 to 300? For some people, sure. For some people, it's going to be hard for them. You have to find ways to kind of game the system, start taking stairs instead of the elevator, take walking lunch breaks, things like that to be able to incorporate in and get more work into the equation. So beginner clients, they got to start with a minimum number of sessions per week and they have to spread it out evenly. And the book goes into this kind of beginner, intermediate, advanced algo thought process where you can use this in terms of programming. As they increase their fitness levels, the frequency can increase. So Sunday's a day of rest. Got it. For beginner, intermediate, but they show advanced is still working on Sunday. And notice what happens here. When you have a beginner, you have 5 days of rest, 2 days of exercise, 4, 3, 3 of 4. Notice how it shifts. You have this trade-off in terms of workload between beginner, immediate, and advanced, and you have 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. I would contest that when we talked about the hard, medium, and easy workouts like we saw in terms of total volume load in chapter 15. When you get into your advanced people, you're going to have hard, medium, easy, hard, medium, very easy, whatever that is going to, however you map that out, because to think that you're going to pound on your people 6 days out of the week and not beat them down and end up with an overuse injury is nonsense. So you have to get good at having variety in here in terms of how you work with your people and what they do in their workouts, so you'd have a hard day, an easy day, or a light day. And I will tell you, when you get into athletes who participate in triathlons, it's difficult for them to have a day off because they have to have undulating days where it's a hard bike day, and then it becomes a hard swim day in the middle of the week, and at the end of the week, it might be a hard run day on the weekend. But somewhere in there, they also have to have an easy run day. They have to have an easy bike day or an interval bike day versus a long, slow distance bike day. And so the programming part becomes more scientific when you start getting into more advanced people, because you have to be able to undulate these loads so you're not blowing your people out of water. Let's go to here. Exercise duration is measured, get myself out of the way, is a measure of how long an exercise session lasts. And it depends on goals, fitness levels, duration, intensity, everything we've talked about before. And there's an inverse relationship between intensity and duration, a lot like if you're going to bench press and do 90% of a 1 rep max, you're only going to get a couple of repetitions versus if you do 50% of a 1 rep max, where you're probably going to get 15 repetitions. All right, opposite ends of the scale. And as intensity increases, repetition decreases. Very similar with aerobic work. As intensity increases and we go from long, slow distance running to sprinting, the duration in which a person can participate in activity decreases. High-end sprinting, is driven by the phosphagen system, and the energy sources available are for very short bursts. If you're going to do long, slow distance, sure, you're going to use the phosphagen system to kind of fire you up for the first, 100 meters, and then it transfers over to the glycolytic system. But then you get into the oxidative system where there's a huge amount of ATP that can be available. So understand that the duration will be dictated by the level of intensity. That's how it works. So I put this up here for you to commit to memory. If the intensity is moderate to high, intermittent exercise bouts of at least 10 minutes, each can improve the aerobic fitness of all but the most advanced clients. And I believe that's a test question somewhere. So they talk about intermittent exercise. And then as we go through this, they note that for the purposes of training the general population, progression can be subcategorized into 2 main groups: improvement or maintenance. As a general rule, weekly increases in frequency, intensity, or duration should be no more than 10%, and only after the client's body has adjusted to the programming, which is great stuff, but I do have a point. In general terms, if the client is new to fitness or intends to improve their fitness levels, they would participate in an improvement program, right? Because they've not reached their levels of fitness. And then when you have a person who is in that program and perhaps they reach a steady state, if they want to maintain their level of fitness, this would be a maintenance program. Maintenance might be pretty easy to remember that way. But I will say this, they don't really describe in terms of adjusted to the programming. Only after the client's body has adjusted to the programming, I'd be curious to know what demonstrative measures they would use, what objective measures they would use to be able to say the client's body has adjusted to the programming. Because to a certain degree, if you're savvy in your programming, they will never fully adjust to the programming or the training stimulus you're applying, because you're constantly training the variables to elicit a training response. Just saying. All right, warm up and cool down. The warm up, you want to increase blood flow to the muscles. You want to slowly raise the heart rate so the oxygen debt is minimized. If you remember that chart, we had oxygen debt and oxygen deficit. You may have to look back into the last module actually. It's also to help prepare the nervous system for the activity that's coming, and then increase the core temperature to cause more unloading of O2 from the blood to the muscles, it gets back to that oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. Now, what happens is if you have too high of a temperature, you have less oxygen can actually dissociate, but you have to have that kind of slow, steady increase in temperature so you don't go from 0 to maximal. And as a result, it can't unload, or it's minimized in terms of its ability to unload oxygen from the blood to the muscles. So, the proper warm-up involves a slow progression from small, simple movements to the larger, more complicated movements that mimic those used during the exercise session. Got it. You want to allow enough time in each activity for the heart rate to increase to meet metabolic demands and progress. Before progressing further, you want to allow enough time to be able to do this, to have your body adapt to a lower level stressor that you're placing upon it. So when you get into the higher level activities, you don't go from the phosphagen system to the aerobic system. You want to remember that one chart, if there's like that overlap between the different systems, you want to have a handoff between those. And even if you are a sprinter, you're still going to do a generalized warm-up, a specific warm-up that probably includes some running technique drills, and then you run your race, right? So there has to be an overall global warm-up of the body first, and then it's a more specific warm-up, and then you go into more specific in terms of running drills, and then you actually perform your event. With that, guys, I'm going to break off and move to the next presentation.